Every month he cried alone at the grave of his wife, whom he believed he had lost forever. But that day, a poor girl broke the silence with a scream that changed everything. "Sir, that woman was here yesterday." The revelation leaves him completely in shock. Robert Caldwell stood motionless before the elegant marble headstone at Oak Ridge Cemetery in Boston. 1 year had passed since the tragic accident that took his wife from him. The autumn wind scattered crimson leaves across the manicured grounds as he placed a bouquet of white lilies, Victoria's favorite, beside the engraved stone that read, "Victoria Ann Caldwell, beloved wife and soul. I brought the champagne you loved," Robert whispered, setting down a bottle of Veuve Clicquot, "the one from our anniversary in Napa." His voice broke as he brushed his fingers across her photograph, embedded in the marble. Her radiant smile and piercing green eyes still took his breath away. At 52, Robert had built one of the most successful investment firms on the East Coast. He had wealth, respect, and influence, everything except the one person he wanted to share it with. His ritual never varied. The 15th of each month was sacred, and on her birthday he'd bring champagne and the cucumber sandwiches she adored. Some of his friends worried about him, suggesting he seek therapy or begin dating again. But how could he? Victoria hadn't just been his wife. She had been his anchor in a world of shifting loyalties and business machinations. "The board asked me again about the London expansion," he continued his one-sided conversation. "I told them what you would have said, that we should wait until the market stabilizes." He smiled faintly. "They still don't understand my caution, but you always did." Lost in memories, Robert didn't notice the small figure approaching until she was standing beside him. A girl no more than 12 years old, with unruly brown hair and clothes too thin for the October chill, studied him with curious eyes. "You talk to her a lot," the girl observed, rocking back on her worn sneakers. Robert straightened, embarrassment coloring his cheeks. "I suppose I do. My grandma says people don't really go away. They just change places." She pointed to Victoria's photograph. "She was pretty." "Yes, she was," Robert said, surprised by the child's directness. "Shouldn't you be in school?" The girl shrugged. "Grandma's sick today." "I'm Maddie, by the way." "I'm Robert," he glanced around. "Are you here with someone, Maddie?" "Just visiting," she said vaguely, then leaned closer to examine Victoria's photograph. Her eyes widened and she took a step back. "Wait, this is the crying lady." Robert froze. "What did you say?" "The lady in the picture," Maddie said, pointing at Victoria's image. "She was here yesterday. Right here at this same place." She was crying really hard. A chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air ran down Robert's spine. "That's impossible," he said, his voice barely audible. "My wife passed away a year ago." Maddie's face scrunched in confusion. "But it was her. She had the same yellow hair and green eyes." She gestured to her shoulders. "It went to here. And she was wearing a blue jacket that was too big for her." Robert stared at the child, his heart pounding. Victoria's favorite jacket had been an oversized navy cashmere that she jokingly called her comfort blanket. It was something so personal, so intimate to their relationship that he'd never mentioned it publicly. "What else?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "What else did you see?" "She had those special sandwiches, the tiny ones with the green stuff." "Cucumber," Robert whispered. "Yeah, and she called the picture Robbie Bear. Is that you?" Robert felt the ground shift beneath him. Robbie Bear, their private endearment, one that Victoria had never used in front of anyone else. It had started on their honeymoon, when a brown bear had wandered near their cabin in Montana, and Victoria had jokingly compared Robert's protective stance to the animal's imposing presence. "Where?" Robert demanded, grasping Maddie's shoulders before quickly releasing them. "Where did she go? Did you follow her?" Maddie nodded, seemingly unperturbed by his intensity. "To the bus stop. She got on the number 47. I saw her get off in Riverview." Riverview, a working-class neighborhood across town, worlds away from the luxurious Beacon Hill townhouse where he and Victoria had lived. The rational part of Robert's mind screamed that this was impossible, perhaps even cruel. A child's imagination, or worse, some elaborate hoax. But the details, how could this girl know those intimate details? "Will you take me there?" he asked, the words escaping before he could reconsider. "To where you saw her?" Maddie studied him for a long moment. "You really didn't know she was alive?" The question hung in the air, terrible and beautiful all at once. "No," Robert answered, his world tilting on its axis. "I didn't." The number 47 bus crawled through Boston's congested streets, carrying Robert and Maddie toward Riverview. Robert sat rigidly in his seat, his mind a battlefield of hope and reason. His driver had protested when he'd called to cancel their afternoon meetings, and had been even more concerned when Robert said he'd be taking public transportation with a child he'd just met. "This is crazy," he muttered, loosening his Italian silk tie. "Completely irrational." "What?" Maddie asked, kicking her feet against the seat in front of them. "Nothing." Robert ran a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "Tell me more about your grandmother. She's sick a lot. We live in the apartment building next to where your lady went." Robert winced at the casual way Maddie referred to Victoria. "And your parents?" A shadow passed over the girl's face. "It's just me and Grandma Emma." She brightened suddenly. "This is our stop." Riverview hadn't earned its picturesque name. The neighborhood was a grid of aging apartment buildings and small businesses with security gates over their windows. Robert felt conspicuous in his tailored suit as Maddie led him down a street of discount stores and laundromats. "There," she said, pointing to a 5-story brick building with fire escapes zigzagging down its facade. "The lady went in there. Apartment 3B, I know because I followed her up the stairs." Robert stared at the building, paralyzed. What if Victoria was really inside? What would he say? And if she wasn't, if this was all an elaborate mistake, how would he handle the crushing disappointment? "Are you coming?" Maddie was already at the entrance. The building's lobby smelled of cooking oil and disinfectant. The elevator was marked out of order, so they climbed the worn stairs to the 3rd floor. Robert's heart hammered against his ribs as Maddie pointed to 3B. "That's it," she whispered. Robert stood before the door, raising his hand to knock, then lowering it again. 1,000 questions swirled in his mind. If Victoria were truly alive, why had she let him believe otherwise? Why would she abandon their life together? Finally, he knocked. The seconds stretched into an eternity before the door opened a crack, revealing a boy of about 8, with familiar green eyes that widened at the sight of strangers. "Hello," Robert said, his voice unsteady. "Is your mother home?" The boy looked over his shoulder before answering. "She's at the pharmacy. She'll be back soon." Those eyes, Victoria's eyes, stared back at Robert from a child's face. His knees threatened to buckle beneath him. "We can wait," Maddie announced cheerfully, pushing the door wider. "I'm Maddie." "This is Robert." The apartment was small but tidy. Textbooks and papers covered a folding table, evidence of someone pursuing an education. Framed photographs lined a shelf, but none included Victoria. The boy, who introduced himself as Ethan, watched Robert with wary curiosity. "Do you like Legos?" Maddie asked, pointing to a half-built structure on the coffee table. As Ethan and Maddie began to play, Robert paced the small living room, examining details that might confirm or disprove his wildest hope. A faint scent in the air, lavender and vanilla, was Victoria's signature fragrance. A dog-eared copy of Jane Eyre on the side table had been her favorite novel. The sound of keys in the lock froze him in place. The door opened, and a woman entered carrying a pharmacy bag. Her once blonde hair was now chestnut brown and cut short, but there was no mistaking her face. The high cheekbones, the gentle curve of her lips, the small scar above her left eyebrow from a childhood fall. Victoria. She stopped mid-step, the bag slipping from her fingers and spilling medications across the floor. Her face drained of all color as she stared at the man she had never expected to see again. "Robert." His name was barely a whisper on her lips. "You're alive." 3 syllables that contained a universe of shock, relief and betrayal. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes darting to Ethan, who looked between the adults with growing confusion. "How did you find me?" "The lady at the cemetery," Maddie piped up. "I saw you there yesterday." Victoria staggered backward, reaching for the wall to steady herself. "Ethan, take Maddie to your room for a few minutes, please." When the children had gone, Victoria sank into a chair, trembling. "I never meant for you to find out this way." "Find out?" Robert's voice rose. "Find out that my wife didn't perish in an accident. That the past year of grieving was based on a lie." He paced the small room. "I identified your body, Victoria. I buried you. I mourned you every single day." "It wasn't me," she said softly. the body in the car. It was a terminal patient with no family. Dr. Lenore helped me. She switched dental records. Robert felt as if he might shatter. Why, for God's sake, Victoria, why would you do this to us? She raised her eyes to meet his, and in them he saw a fear so profound it silenced his anger. Because Ethan's father threatened to take him from me. He said he would destroy everything and everyone I loved. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Including you, Robert. Especially you. Ethan's father, Robert repeated, the pieces slowly falling into place. The boyfriend you told me about from college. You said he was out of the picture. I thought he was. For years he was, Victoria said. Until he wasn't. Victoria's hands trembled as she made tea in the tiny kitchen, her back to Robert. The familiar domestic act seemed surreal in these circumstances, like actors performing on the wrong stage. His name is Derek Lawson, she said, her voice steadier than her hands. We dated in college. He was charismatic, ambitious, and eventually controlling. When I discovered I was pregnant, I saw another side of him, volatile, possessive. I left him before Ethan was born. She placed 2 mugs on the coffee table and sat across from Robert. For years I had no contact with him. I built a new life, finished my degree. Then I met you. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. You were everything he wasn't, kind, supportive, respectful. Why didn't you tell me about Ethan? Robert asked, the hurt evident in his voice. Victoria looked down. I was afraid. Our relationship was moving so fast, and I'd been rejected before because of Ethan. When we got engaged, I convinced myself I'd tell you after the wedding, but you didn't. No, she admitted. And then weeks became months and months became years, and the lie grew too big. I was terrified of losing you, so you kept him hidden for all those years? Robert couldn't mask his disbelief. Where was he? With my cousin Allison in Chicago. I visited monthly, those business trips to the Midwest. Shame colored her voice. Ethan thought I was an aunt who cared for him, while his mother traveled for work. The arrangement was temporary, just until I found the right moment to tell you. Robert absorbed this, remembering those regular trips he'd never questioned. And Derek? How did he find you again? Victoria's face darkened. Last year, Derek somehow tracked down Allison. He'd become wealthy from some tech investment and used his resources to find Ethan. He threatened to sue for custody, to expose my deception to you and ruin your reputation in the financial world. She took a shaky breath. He said he'd release fabricated evidence that you'd been involved in fraud. I would have fought him, Robert said firmly. You don't know him like I do. He doesn't fight fair, he destroys people. Victoria's eyes glistened. When he threatened you, I panicked. Dr. Lenore, my therapist, suggested the unthinkable. She had a patient with no family who was in hospice care. When she passed peacefully, Her voice broke. You put her in your car and staged the accident, Robert finished, his tone flat with disbelief. Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face. The plan was for Ethan and me to start over somewhere far away. But I couldn't leave without saying goodbye in some way. That's why I was at the cemetery yesterday. It was the anniversary. A long silence fell between them, filled with the weight of years of deception and grief. I grieved you, Robert finally said, his voice raw. I lost myself when I lost you. And I grieved you too every day knowing you were alive but unreachable. She reached tentatively for his hand. I never stopped loving you, Robert. Never. He didn't pull away, but neither did he return her grasp. The boy Ethan, does he know about me? He knows I remarried, that I had a husband I loved deeply. But he doesn't know the details of why we left. From the bedroom they heard the children laughing. The sound was jarring against the heaviness of their conversation. What happens now? Victoria asked, fear edging back into her voice. Will you report me to the authorities? Robert stared at her for a long moment. Despite everything, the sight of her alive sent waves of relief through him so profound, they almost overwhelmed his sense of betrayal. No, he said finally. But we can't stay here. If Derek is as dangerous as you say, this apartment isn't safe. Hope flickered in Victoria's eyes. You believe me? I believe you believe he's dangerous, Robert said carefully. That's enough for now. The bedroom door opened and Ethan emerged with Maddie. He approached slowly, studying Robert with those familiar green eyes. Are you really my mom's husband? He asked directly. Robert looked to Victoria, who nodded slightly. Yes, he answered. I am. Ethan's chin lifted in a gesture so reminiscent of Victoria that it made Robert's chest ache. "Did you know about me before today?" The directness of the question left no room for evasion. "No, I didn't." "Ethan," Victoria began, but her son cut her off. "It's okay, Mom, I just wanted to know." He turned back to Robert. "Do you want us to leave?" The simple question from this child, Victoria's child, struck Robert with unexpected force. "No," he said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I want you both to come with me where you'll be safe." "What about Maddie?" Ethan asked. "And her grandmother? The man Mum's afraid of might hurt them too if he comes looking for us." Robert looked at the girl who had unwittingly changed everything. "Where do you and your grandmother live, Maddie?" "Next door. Apartment 3A, but Grandma Emma can't walk good anymore." Robert stood, decision made. "Pack what you need, all of you. We're leaving within the hour." "Maddie will help your grandmother, too." Victoria stared at him in disbelief. "Where are we going?" "My beach house in Cape Ann. It's isolated, secure, and has plenty of room." His tone softened. "I need time, Victoria. Time to process everything. But I won't leave you, any of you, in danger." As they prepared to leave, Robert stepped into the hallway to call his most trusted employee, Security Chief Frank Donovan. "Frank, I need a full background check on someone named Derek Lawson, tech industry, and I need you to ready the Cape House immediately. We'll need medical equipment for an elderly woman and enhanced security protocols." When he ended the call, Robert stood for a moment in the dimly lit hallway, the reality of the situation washing over him. His wife was alive. She had a son. And they were all potentially in danger from a man who had already driven Victoria to desperate measures. What had begun as a ritual of grief at a cemetery was now spiraling into something he couldn't have imagined, a second chance mingled with threat, deception tangled with opportunity. The Cape Ann beach house stood like a sentinel on a rocky promontory overlooking the Atlantic. 3 stories of weathered cedar shingles and expansive glass, it had always been Robert's sanctuary from the pressures of Boston. Now, as the small convoy of vehicles pulled up the private drive, he wondered if it could become a sanctuary for them all. Frank Donovan had orchestrated everything with military precision. Emma Wilson, Maddie's grandmother, had been transported by medical van. Victoria, Ethan, and Maddie had traveled in an unmarked SUV with Frank's most trusted security officer. Robert had driven separately, needing the solitude to process the seismic shift in his reality. The first days at the beach house were a strange dance of awkward encounters and careful conversations. Victoria moved through the rooms like a ghost, familiar yet foreign in a space that had once been theirs. Ethan explored cautiously, his curious eyes taking in the wealth that surrounded him. Maddie, by contrast, treated the massive house like an adventure playground, while Emma rested comfortably in a first-floor bedroom, converted for her needs. On the 3rd morning, Robert found Victoria on the deck overlooking the ocean, wrapped in a blanket against the October chill. "I called Charles Sullivan," he said, joining her at the railing. Sullivan was his attorney and oldest friend. "He's coming tomorrow to discuss options." Victoria's knuckles whitened as she gripped the railing. "Legal options?" "All options," Robert clarified. "For your situation, for Ethan's protection, for Emma and Maddie's care." A gull cried overhead as they stood in silence, the rhythmic crash of waves below punctuating the unsaid. "I should have trusted you," Victoria finally said, her voice barely audible above the wind. "With everything, with Ethan, with Derek's threats. You had a right to know." "Yes, I did." Robert's tone was measured. "But fear makes people act in ways they never thought possible." He turned to face her. "I understand fear, Victoria. What I'm struggling with is the deception. Not just about Ethan, but letting me believe you were gone forever." "I know," she whispered. "I know." Inside the house, the atmosphere grew more complex as the days passed. Emma's health improved with proper care, and she formed an unlikely friendship with Mrs. Abernathy, the housekeeper who'd worked for Robert for 20 years. Maddie thrived in the spacious environment, her natural resilience shining through. It was Ethan who remained guarded. He watched Robert with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, especially when Robert interacted with Victoria. The boy's protectiveness toward his mother was evident in his vigilant gaze, in the way he positioned himself between them when possible. On the 5th evening, Robert was working in his study when he heard the muffled sound of voices from the kitchen below. He recognized Frank Donovan's deep baritone and moved to the intercom system installed throughout the house, a feature Victoria had once teased him about as excessively CEO-like. "Spotted at a gas station in Gloucester yesterday," Frank was saying. The facial recognition software confirms it's him. Victoria's response was too quiet to hear, but the fear in her tone carried through the static. "We've enhanced security. Mrs. Caldwell, he won't get near this property." Robert's finger hovered over the intercom button, but he pulled back, unsettled by the confirmation that Derek Lawson was indeed in the area. The threat Victoria feared wasn't paranoia. It was real and closing in. Later that night, a thunderstorm lashed the coastline. Robert couldn't sleep, his mind racing with contingency plans and legal strategies from his earlier call with Sullivan. Around midnight, he headed to the kitchen for a drink, only to find Ethan seated at the island, a glass of milk before him. "Couldn't sleep?" Robert asked, keeping his tone casual as he opened the refrigerator. Ethan shrugged. "The storm's loud." Robert poured himself a glass of water. "It gets like this in fall. The house is built to withstand it, though." "Is it built to keep him out, too?" Ethan asked bluntly. The question caught Robert off guard. "Your father, you mean?" Ethan nodded. "I heard Mr. Donovan talking to Mom. He's nearby." Robert sat across from the boy, measuring his words. "Yes, the house is secure. We have good people watching over us." "He won't stop," Ethan said with the terrible certainty of a child who's grown up too quickly. "He told me once that he always gets what he wants." "When did you meet him?" Robert asked, surprised. "Last year. He showed up at Aunt Allison's when Mom was away." Ethan's eyes lowered to his milk. "He said he was going to take me to live with him, that Mom had kept me from him illegally. He said her new husband, you, didn't want me around anyway." The revelation sent a chill through Robert that had nothing to do with the storm outside. "Ethan, look at me." He waited until the boy raised his eyes. "Whatever Derek told you about me was a lie. He didn't know me. And even if I had known about you then, I would never have rejected you." "Really?" Disbelief colored the boy's voice. "Most guys don't want to raise some other man's kid." "That's what Derek said." "I'm not most guys," Robert said firmly. "And you're not some other man's kid. You're Victoria's son. That matters to me." The kitchen fell silent except for the drumming of rain against the windows. Finally, Ethan spoke again, his voice smaller. "I heard Mom crying last night. She's scared." "I know," Robert acknowledged. "But we're going to fix this, Ethan, all of it." "How?" The challenge in the boy's question was clear. Before Robert could answer, the overhead lights flickered once, twice, then plunged the kitchen into darkness as the storm claimed the power. Ethan's sharp intake of breath was audible in the sudden blackness. "It's okay," Robert said calmly, reaching for his phone to activate its flashlight. "The generators will kick in any second." But when the backup power hummed to life moments later, it wasn't the generators that captured their attention. It was the security alarm blaring throughout the house. The security alarm's wail pierced through the storm's cacophony, triggering an immediate response from Frank Donovan and his team. Robert instinctively pulled Ethan behind him as Victoria burst into the kitchen, her face pale with terror. "It's the west perimeter," Frank announced, checking the security panel. Tree down on the fence triggered the sensor. Not an intrusion. The relief in the room was palpable as the alarm silenced. "We'll do a full property check to be certain." The false alarm left everyone on edge. No one returned to bed. Instead, they gathered in the great room where a fire crackled in the massive stone hearth. Maddie curled up beside her grandmother on the sofa, while Ethan sat cross-legged on the floor, absently petting Robert's golden retriever, Cooper, who had appointed himself the boy's guardian since their arrival. As the storm gradually subsided, so did the immediate tension. By dawn, weak sunlight filtered through the windows, illuminating the tired faces of those who had kept vigil through the night. Robert watched as Victoria gently covered Maddie with a blanket, struck by how naturally she cared for a child who wasn't her own. "You're good with her," he observed quietly when Victoria joined him by the window. "She reminds me of myself at that age," Victoria admitted. "Before my parents were—" She hesitated, using the euphemism they'd adopted. "Before they were no longer with us." Robert nodded, remembering how Victoria's parents had passed in a car accident when she was just 13. It was one of the genuine pieces of her past she had shared with him. "Robert," she began, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. "I've been thinking about what you said, about trusting you. You were right. I should have from the beginning." "We can't change the past," he responded, surprising himself with the lack of bitterness in his tone. "No, but we can decide our future." Victoria took a deep breath. "I want to turn myself in. It's the only way to end this, all of this." Robert stared at her. "That could mean prison, Victoria. I know. But living in fear, letting Derek control us through that fear, that's its own kind of prison." She glanced at Ethan. "And what am I teaching him by running? That deception is the answer. That's Derek's way, not mine." Before Robert could respond, Charles Sullivan arrived, looking impeccable despite the early hour. The attorney listened gravely as Victoria recounted the entire story: Ethan's concealment, Derek's threats, the faked accident, and the year in hiding. "It's a complex situation," Sullivan admitted when she finished. "Insurance fraud, identity falsification, potentially obstruction of justice. But there are mitigating circumstances, documented threats, evidence of psychological distress, no intent for financial gain." "What about Dr. Lenore?" Robert asked. "She facilitated all this." Sullivan's expression was grim. "Her actions cross serious ethical and legal lines. She'll face separate consequences." "And Derek?" Victoria asked, the fear still evident in her voice. "He's here in Gloucester." Frank confirmed it. Sullivan nodded thoughtfully. "We've compiled a file on Mr. Lawson. There's evidence of tax evasion, corporate espionage, and multiple restraining orders from former associates. Most significantly, we've located Alison Reed, your cousin, who's willing to testify about his threatening behavior toward Ethan." As the day progressed, Sullivan outlined a strategy. Victoria would voluntarily come forward, with a carefully prepared statement and evidence of Derek's coercion. There would be legal consequences, but with proper representation, they might be minimized. That evening, as the children played a board game with Emma, Robert found Victoria on the beach, watching the waves reclaim the shore after the storm. "I spoke with the district attorney," he said, joining her on a driftwood log. "An old Harvard classmate. He's willing to hear our case informally before any charges are filed." Victoria's eyes widened. "You're supporting this? Me turning myself in?" "I'm supporting you," Robert clarified. "Your decision to face this head-on rather than run from it. It's the right thing to do." Tears filled her eyes. "What about Ethan? If I go to prison—" "He'll stay with me," Robert said firmly. "I've already spoken to Sullivan about beginning adoption proceedings, with your blessing. Derek won't get anywhere near him. You would do that after everything." Robert was quiet for a moment, watching the horizon where sea met sky. "This past week has been illuminating. Ethan is an extraordinary boy, thoughtful, brave, protective. Like his mother." He turned to face her. "I've lost a year with both of you. I don't want to lose any more time." Victoria's hand found his on the weathered wood between them. "I don't deserve a second chance. None of us get what we deserve, good or bad," Robert replied. "We get what we choose to build from the ruins of our mistakes." He squeezed her hand. "And I choose to build something new with you, with Ethan, when you're able to come home again." As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the turbulent sea, they were joined on the beach by Ethan, Maddie, and Emma in her wheelchair. Pushed by Mrs. Abernathy, Cooper bounded ahead, chasing gulls along the waterline. "Are we having a family meeting?" Maddie asked, plopping down on the sand. Family. The word hung in the air, unexpected but not unwelcome. "Something like that," Robert answered. "We're making plans for the future." "All of us?" Ethan asked cautiously. Robert met the boy's questioning gaze. "All of us." 2 days later, Victoria stood before Judge Eleanor Winters in a closed preliminary hearing, Robert and Sullivan beside her, as she delivered a statement that laid bare every detail of her deception and the circumstances that led to it. The judge, a formidable woman with 4 decades on the bench, listened without expression. "Mrs. Caldwell," Judge Winters finally said, "what you've described involves serious criminal actions. However, the evidence of duress and the unusual circumstances warrant consideration." She tapped her pen against her notepad. "I'm ordering a full investigation, including into Mr. Lawson's alleged threats and Dr. Lenore's involvement. Until then, you'll remain under house arrest with monitoring." It wasn't freedom, but it wasn't prison either. As they left the courthouse through a private exit, Victoria exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. "It's over," she whispered. "No more hiding." "Not over," Robert corrected gently, guiding her to the waiting car where Frank stood vigilant. "Just beginning." Back at the Cape House, Ethan was waiting on the porch steps, his face anxious until he saw his mother. He ran to her, and Victoria embraced him tightly, whispering reassurances. That night, as a new storm approached from the Atlantic, the unlikely household gathered in the kitchen where Emma was teaching Maddie her secret recipe for cinnamon rolls. Victoria joined them, her ankle monitor a visible reminder of consequences still unfolding, while Robert and Ethan worked on a model ship at the table. It wasn't the life any of them had expected, forged as it was from deception, fear, and chance encounters. But as Robert watched Ethan carefully align the tiny mast, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. Just as Victoria did when focused, he recognized the truth. Family isn't always what we're born into or what we plan. Sometimes it's what finds us when everything else is lost. Outside, the wind rose, heralding the storm's arrival. But inside they were anchored, to each other, to the truth, to the possibility of forgiveness. And for now, that was enough.